Hello everyone. Today is Sunday afternoon, March 29th. A huge shout out to my parents who have been married for 62 years today, so congratulations. If I cough during this afternoon's reading, it's because I've just come back inside after chainsawing and weed whacking. So today's reading is chapter 3 of About That Wine I Gave You. The title of the chapter is Padre on a Mission, and in this chapter we meet the narrator and are introduced to some of the characters. So here we go. Padre on a Mission. San Diego is the birthplace of California wine. As surely as Mission San Diego de Acala was the first Spanish settlement in Alta California, and Spanish settlers brought with them their addiction to the grape, San Diego was the first wine-producing area in California. Is it true? It makes perfectly good sense to me, and is a good starting point when telling the history of San Diego viticulture and its renaissance. That, along with the unveiling of Carrie Ann's tattoo and the Vineyard of Eden yarn Paul sent anyone who asked for advice about planting grapes. What gives me the right to tell this story? Well, I saw it all, at least everything that happened in our community in the Hidden Hills, 40 miles north of downtown. I'm the one who sold Carrie Ann, Merlot Mac, Paul, and Sheila, and the other winemakers their land, and helped plant their grapes. I certainly helped drink their wine. We were all good friends. People say Father Junipero Serra himself, founder of the California Missions, planted California's first grapevines right here in San Diego with his own hands. They didn't survive. Paul had the same problem too when he tried to dry farm vines. They all died. Of course, Miguel, the godfather of the migrant workers around here, claims it was his ancestors who tended the first vines. Whenever I hear him say that, I tell him his kin only joined the mission because Father Serra served the locals free wine at communion during church as bait, and his family was the first to sign up. If the Padres had also served cerveza, there would have been more converts and the missions would have flourished to this day. Now that's the kind of proselytizing preached by the Bootleggers Express. Wine for the people. The bishop likes that slogan too. Whenever Paul's wine was served during church communion ceremonies, there were incidents of double dipping, a sin in the eyes of the altar guild ladies who wouldn't be caught dead or red-handed dunking the wafer-thin body of Christ into his blood twice. They just took a good long swig from the cup, while those surrounding the altar schemed to take any leftover sacrificial wine from the Holy Grail for themselves. The first time Paul offered wine as a gift to his church, the altar guild ladies complained, "We can't allow red wine to be served at the Lord's table because it'll stain the linens," while their priest claimed, "It's a historical fact. Wine served at the Last Supper was white." Paul left them a bottle to try and drove his vineyard mobile down to the diocesan office and unloaded a pallet of wine where the bishop accepted the gift on behalf of the churches with less money. When the altar guild ladies got around to trying Paul's wine while playing bridge one afternoon, they repealed their edict against red wine and invited Paul back. Whenever he donated wine to his church, he always brought extra bottles for the clergy, altar guild ladies, lay ministry, and the parishioners, so no one would be tempted to borrow wine designated for the church. For it is written, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wine." Wine for the people, by the people. Amen. Everywhere you go in San Diego, you'll find pepper trees, willowing green strings with pink peppercorns brought here by our Spanish founders who crave spice in addition to olives and wine. They grow like weeds, just like Mexican palms. A nuisance, really, both of them. If you don't get rid of them when they're young, you're facing a back-breaking job digging them out. Gotta hire a Mexican to dig out a Mexican palm. Shovel-ready work. Politicians should send those palms back to Mexico instead of our hard workers. Now that would clean up the community. Vineyards are popping up around here like gopher holes all throughout the 4,500 square miles of San Diego County. And just our neighborhood, there's Carrie Ann, Merlot Mac, Joe the Wino, and half a dozen others. You know us for our beaches, but we're also a rural county, ranked 12th in agriculture among all U.S. counties. The growth in vineyards makes sense because the avocado, which has dominated this region's agriculture for so many years, is a thirsty tree, and there's less water to go around. And with global warming, grapevines are an appropriate crop for San Diego. You may not believe in climate change. I've had my doubts, but drought is real. Just ask the growers. Everyone knows Napa Valley, and you should have heard of Paso Robles by now. Some people call Paso the new Napa because the wine industry is growing. The wines are good, and when you visit the tasting rooms, many modest by Napa standards and affordable, you can still meet the wine growers, just like Napa in the old days. Wine regions have emerged all over the world, with New World wineries flourishing in Australia, New Zealand, South America, and South Africa in the Southern Hemisphere, with vineyards springing up in temperate rural regions as fast as microbreweries in America. Even Guadalupe Valley in Mexico, just south of San Diego, is touted as a trendy wine destination. And one of the best wines I ever tasted by San Diego winemakers was made using Baja grapes. As for old world wine regions, a bit of competition from the rest of the world has encouraged them to upgrade techniques to improve their product, with a winemaking renaissance in Italy, Spain, and even in France. So why not San Diego, one of the first wine-producing regions in the New World, blessed with an ideal temperate climate for growing just about everything under the sun? Just add water. What became of those first vines planted in the 18th century by Father Serra and his compadres? Probably died from Pierce's disease. That's what got most of the vines around here last century. Prohibition didn't help either. Note to self, go find those first vines using satellite imagery. Shouldn't be much harder than spotting rusted out vehicles in the desert. San Diego's climate is ideal for grapes, but not all varietals, because it gets hot in summer, and good Pinot likes a cooler climate. Carrie Ann researched which grapes grow best here, and which don't, by planting a small experimental vineyard with a Noah's Ark of varietals. The weather is consistently dry in summer and into the harvest season, resulting in a consistent product each year. You usually don't need to worry about rain ruining grapes at the end of August and in the first half of September, whereas in Northern California, where the harvest is later, there's a threat of October and November rains, with vintners paying close attention to weather to pick before a storm. Another threat to grapes up in Northern California is spring frost, which can ruin tender budding shoots. Not so in most of San Diego, unless the vineyard's at the bottom of a valley. Our county landscape is so diverse we have those areas too. Of course, San Diego growers pay attention to the weather as harvest approaches, on the lookout for a heat wave in mid to late August that could shrivel their grapes or cause sugars to spike. At the sign of brutal heat, the vintners turn on their drip irrigation to keep grape sugars from rising too high before acids have settled down. Hang around winemakers a few years and you'll learn all this. After the heat hump in late August and early September, things usually cool down a bit, and this is the pattern year after year. The weather is so consistent. Joe the Wino's big harvest party is always the Sunday of Labor Day weekend. For most people, Labor Day is a holiday, but Paul said, "Je suis travailleur," claiming a badge of honor. He's a laborer who works his hardest on Labor Day. Back in the day, when I started in real estate, I met a number of retirees, some as far away as Connecticut, looking to invest in San Diego land and plant avocados as a cash crop. Water was plentiful, as water agencies had secured rights to Colorado River water and even offered lower rates to growers as an incentive to produce more. A scientist speaking at Rotary recently explained we've been in systemic drought since 1999. When water becomes as expensive as gasoline, that's when you'll see serious conservation. Meantime, as water allocations decrease and rates increase, many growers have taken some of their avos out of production, stumped and left to fend for themselves, or replaced with drought-tolerant crops. I remember selling a 25-acre avocado grove in 2006, and the new owner cut down all the trees and planted grapes. First time I'd seen that, and not the last. For sure, grapes are less thirsty than avos and oranges. Still, most grapevines need some irrigation around here, unless they're planted over a leach field or spring. When Paul tried dry farming a section of his vineyard to conserve water, all the unwatered vines died. Boy, was his wife Sheila pissed. San Diego's annual rainfall is only 8 inches a year. Compare that to 35 inches in Paso Robles. Of course, 8 inches is an average, so many years it's a lot less until the El Niño blows in. With thoughtful irrigation, grapes and the wine industry should continue growing here. Paul claimed the journey from vines to wine is as tough as an Everest expedition. A bit of an exaggeration, but not far off the mark. I'll tell you who had a tougher journey. The man who planted the first grapes here, Father Serra, started from Mexico in 1769 at the age of 55 and traveled to San Diego, mostly by foot, a journey of 2,000 miles through inhospitable territory, vulnerable to ambush. Much of the land practically desert. He and the conquistadors walked and rode along the scrub with the hot sun beating down. Refusing to ride on an animal's back, Father Serra, near retirement age, the age of many vintners in the area, kept going, one step at a time. And when his foot and leg failed to proceed, he reluctantly rode a mule. There was no other choice. Adapt and survive. This rugged, inhospitable terrain, a no man's land between today's U.S. and Mexico border, would claim many lives. And Father Serra barely survived the journey. He was a man on a mission, another Spaniard chasing windmills. Carrie Ann and Paul dreamed of planting a vineyard. He was a man dreaming to settle a continent, starting in his mid-50s. The pioneers' arrival in San Diego was not auspicious. Local natives ventured out to meet them, and at first the two groups traded, but bloody skirmishes soon broke out. Native peoples lost their lives. Conquistadors were wounded, and like their English counterparts who colonized Virginia at Jamestown 150 years earlier, many in the Spanish expedition succumbed to scurvy and other diseases. Father Serra could have easily perished. He could have turned back, but he kept going forward, and through perseverance survived and founded Mission San Diego de Acala, the first in a string of 9 missions along the Alta California coast, from San Diego to San Francisco, connected by a trail that became known as El Camino Real. Within 15 years, over 5,000 souls were saved. The missions stand to this day. When you visit California, make it a point to see one or two. Even if you don't visit the missions, you're likely to cross El Camino Real in your car, and you'll be following Father Serra's footsteps. After the conquistadors and friars constructed missions and presidios, they planted grapes, because every good Spanish soldier and priest deserved a glass of wine. I bet wine fueled the journey of this friar until his 17th century. You think faith fueled Father Serra? Let me tell you something about faith. The bishop says there's nothing like being in a foxhole to find religion. That had the opposite effect on me. I entered the army a believer, but after seeing your buddy bleed out in front of you, with pieces of his guts and bones splattered on your face, how could a gracious God let that happen? I don't need religion, and I don't need to go to church. Look out the windows at the mountains. Now that's religion. And at night, I point my telescope at glistening stars, constellations, and galaxies. The night sky is my cathedral. Father Serra's passion for the Lord was as single-minded as Carrie Ann's for the grape and Sheila's for the vine. I wonder if Father Serra had a taste for the grape. Surrounded by all that communion wine, you don't suppose he tasted it occasionally to check quality, like our neighbor Paul, the self-appointed winemaker to the bishop. I once visited Paul when he was doing barrel taste tests. Everyone else in the neighborhood used a glass or stainless steel wine thief to pull a sample, while he used a turkey baster, his second most important piece of winery equipment, after a wooden paddle he got as a kid in summer camp. Pop off the barrel bung, pull a sample, inhale, sip, slurp, hiss, gargle, swallow, spit. Me, never. Oh, that's good, Paul'd say. Best wine we ever made. Maybe we should bottle it now while it tastes so good. Sheila, taste this. You say we should quit making wine and sell our grapes. You won't want to quit after you taste this. Paul was bitten by the bug and had enough positive reinforcement from those barrel tastings to keep going and try another year. And then another. One step at a time. Just like Father Serra. While Jenny Lee, Steph, and Carrie Ann were taught the history of the Alamo and the Texas Republic, Paul, and all fourth graders in California, studied Father Serra and the founding of the missions. Although wine was introduced to the New World from Spanish and other European cultures, Carrie Ann claimed it was Texas and its native Mustang grape that saved Europe's wine industry from the scourge of phylloxera, as deadly to grapevines as HIV to humans, her family providing the Mustang grape cutting that saved Father's vines. The story earned her several glasses of free wine when the girls visited Paris. Carrie Ann persuaded Fredericksburg's mayor and the Texas state legislature to erect a Lone Star State historical plaque by the surviving Mustang grape at her old family property, designating it and Texas the savior of France's viticulture. New World saving the old for the first time and not for the last. In the last century, San Diego's viticulture suffered its own deadly 1-2 punch. Prohibition knocked the wind out of the industry's stomach. Then Pierce's disease knocked most vineyards out, dead. The oldest modern era winery in San Diego was started by the Fiera family in 1932. Ferrara's motherlode vine was thicker than a well-fed python, its crown greater than a picnic table, and place setting for a dozen. You're not going to find too many vines old and gnarly as that around here. Most of Ferrara's vines were sweet, made from the Alexandra Muscat grape, which is what the public wanted. Old wineries and winos fade away. The Ferrara family moved on. Tastes change, and what was once a vineyard is now a row of houses. That monster vine they had is gone too. The winery's building and equipments were recently sold to a new owner, who's giving it a go to make something new upon the foundation of something old. In the late 1960s, commercial wine grapes started making a comeback in Southern California, this time in Temecula, about an hour drive north of downtown San Diego, where Eli Callaway, the golf club entrepreneur, founded his namesake winery. Now, I remember the first time I went and thought the whites were good. Thank goodness for the growth of the golf industry, which fueled Eli's winery, which served as a catalyst for other commercial wineries in the area. Temecula emerged as a wine destination within driving distance of the greater Los Angeles megalopolis, with much of its product geared towards bachelorette parties and tour buses at an affordable price. By the time of the American upset at the Paris wine tasting shootout in 1976, it was Napa that was flourishing. Pierce's disease, carried by sharpshooters, hadn't migrated north, at least yet, sparing Napa's vines. When baby boomers in San Diego started retiring and pursued their dreams of planting a vineyard. They had quality in mind, not quantity. Indeed, winemaking techniques and growing techniques improved throughout the world and up in Temecula too, although it's encouraging multi-million-dollar mega winery projects with hotels instead of boutique wineries. Taste change. Maxwell House coffee gave way to espresso. Wonder Bread turned into baguettes, or loaves with so many grains they're heavier than a brick. Dry wines are preferred to sweet. All the talk is farm to table, organic, sustainable agriculture, locally grown, heart healthy, brain healthy food, and the mythology of wine. This is no exaggeration. The Greeks had their Dionysus, the Romans their Bacchus, and hoity-toity Californians worship the grape. It's ridiculous to hear aficionados talk about some of the tastes they find in wine. Have you ever tasted chocolate in wine? What a bunch of crap. An espresso? Better not to mix that in. I don't care what some famous critic says about a particular wine or how many points the wine inspector gives it. Everyone's taste buds are different. What matters is how it tastes in my mouth, not somebody else's. I sigh every time my wife spends $75 or more on a bottle from some boutique winery she and Carrie Ann discovered. If you analyze what it cost Paul to produce a bottle of wine and counted every expense, including all his time, plus the time of his wife Sheila they spent in the vineyard, and what he paid for his property, it probably cost him $500 to produce a good bottle. He certainly made a lot of bad bottles. My ongoing quest is to find good wines under $10. If it tastes good and my doc says it's good for you, that works for me. Don't bother showing me double-blind scientific studies correlating wine to good health. I'll leave that to Carrie Ann. The fact I'm still here is proof enough. Wine is good for you. Likewise, grapes are good for San Diego. And every month I'm approached by someone looking to move here who wants to plant a vineyard. I bite my tongue and I don't tell them you're crazy. They'd be better off buying good wine and making it instead of making their own. I say, you've come to the right place. And there's a family, a friendly community and supportive. There's already a friendly community of supportive winemakers. And I drive them around pointing out all the vineyards. And land in San Diego is a bargain compared to San Francisco and Napa. So why not buy a larger property here and put in a backyard vineyard if that's your dream? Who doesn't want to live in a community of vineyards? My advice is, if you plan to take care of it yourself though, don't make it too large. Otherwise, what should be a nice hobby becomes work. Carrie Ann's first experimental vineyard was the perfect size, about a quarter acre with 200 vines. It was manageable. When Paul and Sheila started with 2,000 vines, that wasn't a hobby. It was a second job, and the last time I saw him on the golf course. How crazy was that? As crazy as tattooing your sternum and founding a string of missions along California. 1 + 1 = 2. And 2 and 2 are 4. And 4 times 4 makes a revolution. When one person starts a vineyard, they start sprouting up all over the neighborhood. That's exactly what's been happening throughout the county, from Campo to Rainbow. And see for yourself. From downtown San Diego, head north 30 miles to the community of Rancho Bernardo and Bernardo Winery, founded in 1889. A destination with a dozen craft shops and tasting room. The new generation of winemakers at Bernardo has adopted modern techniques and makes terrific wines from local fruit. Get back on the 15 north and take the exit for Highland Valley Road and head into the hills that used to be a sanctuary for avocado groves. Now there's a vineyard after every curve. I've never been a fan of cab grown in Southern California. My taste buds prefer the rich, velvety cabs from Napa. At Altipiano Winery in Highland Valley, the winemaker Denise took me into her temperature-controlled barrel room and thieved me a sample, and I complimented her, saying it was the first cab grown in San Diego I liked. I reserved a case for my wife, and if she doesn't like it, I'll drink it myself. Leaving Altipiano, pass a dozen wineries, driving up the mountainside, and arrive at Cordiano Winery for fresh pizza and killer views. From there, heading north and entering Ramona and a whole cluster of winemakers who have their own AVA. Ramona Valley, a big part of San Diego's wine scene. Drive down the mountain to the 15 and head north again, crossing Lake Hodges. And the next stop on our tour is Orfila, San Diego County's largest winery with 70 acres and crushing 300 tons of fruit in a good year. That will yield over 600 barrels, and at 24 cases per barrel, over 14,000 cases per year. Puny by Napa standards, but considerable compared to the garagists who transformed their garages and walkout basements into wineries. Get back on the 15 and head north, past downtown San Diego, wave to Stone Brewery, the mothership of San Diego's beer scene, and enter a section of interstate called Avocado Highway, one of the world's most scenic highways, all the way to the county line in Fallbrook. You'll see some vineyards along the interstate, and most of them hidden in the hills. And as you head back down towards San Diego on the 15, you'll approach Belle Marie Winery on the right, the sun to the many winery moons it spun off in the hidden hills. Now head up into those hills, and you'll find a dozen vineyards and a community of winemakers, including Joe the Wino, Carrie Ann, and a micro winery founded by a dog, a blue merle Australian shepherd named Bluey, for his blue eyes and patches of blue-gray fur, one of the smartest dogs you'll ever meet. Now, in the autumn of 2006, after Paul and Sheila moved to the area, I helped them and Carrie Ann trailer back to their garages a ton of Nebbiolo grapes grown across the border in Mexico. The grapes were so good, almost all the amateur winemakers and several commercial wineries ordered some. Steph organized the orders for the amateurs, and there weren't enough grapes for everyone. Now, one of the guys called her a stupid Mexican for not ordering enough. Now, that's no way to treat a lady, and as I cocked my fist to punch the jerk, Paul separated us before blood was spilt. The wine Paul made from those grapes turned out good, and he named it Steph's Honor. I still have some bottles he gave me I'm saving for a special occasion. Paul exchanged bottles with a winemaker from the Texas Hill Country named Buffalo Dave, who declared, "This shit is good." Well, you don't get better reviews than that. Well, something went wrong with Carrie Ann's batch, and she ended up with vinegar. The winemaking bug bit her pretty hard that year, and she started buying grapes whenever she heard they were for sale. I worried she was infected by this parasite that makes you turn into a crazy lady zombie winemaker. The virus originates from vines who take over your mind and make you do irrational things, namely plant more vines. I wonder if she'd ever make any wine that was any good. Her best friends were concerned too, and came over to visit her on the eve of her planting party.